ahead and do what you want to do.
Okay, awesome.
And then I will do the introductions here.
Sounds good.
Okay, let me just make sure. It looks like we are live here. Thank you, and welcome to everybody that's out there on YouTube. Uh, this is our final session for the virtual VISTI conference, or whatever we're calling this thing, playground or whatever. And we thank you all for being here late on a Wednesday afternoon. I'm going to introduce Jorge Valenzuela here. He's going to be talking about a very appropriate topic about how we make remote learning engaging for students, especially since it looks like most, if not many, if not most of us will be doing virtual learning beginning in the fall. So George, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you talk to everybody else.
Hey everyone, good evening. I want to say thank you. I know it's the final session of the conference, and I just want to give you all some snaps real quick. If you can drop some virtual snaps into the chat box in Zoom, I would appreciate that. I know that you're with me. And so, like Tim mentioned, the title of my presentation is Make Remote Learning Engaging for Students by Focusing on Equity in Social Emotional Learning. And so the first thing I want us to do is look at the first bullet. So we're going to go over some norms and expectations. And so only if you have a device other than the laptop that you're looking at, okay, which it could be a cell phone, it could be an iPad, whatever you want it to be, I want you to go to join.nearpod.com in your browser, and I want you to use the code XMFYU. And the reason why I want you to do that is because I want to model what Nearpod looks like, okay? Now, our presentation will not be in Nearpod, but there are parts of it that will be. And so I want you to look at those. Now, if you don't have a handy device, that's okay. You can play this back and you can go back and do this on your own. For those who like to tweet, please be sure to tag both Visti and me, and our handles are on the second bullet. So mine is at George Does PBL, that is JORGE. The second is at Visti, and use the hashtag VistiVirtual. Now, I do want to make everyone aware that we're going to be addressing topics of racial equity in the United States. And we understand that these are very sensitive items to many people, and rightly so. But we want you to know that we're only addressing them for the greater good of our students, of our state, our regions, and our country. And so I want you to please be aware of that. All attendees will receive a PDF with links to all of the videos and resources that are highlighted in our session. And now on to introductions. And so as stated previously, my name is George, and I'm your featured speaker and your learning partner for the next hour. And I would love to get to know all of you. So only if you have a device, only, I want you to go to Nearpod, that's join.nearpod.com, and use the code on your screen. But everyone else, I want you to interact in the chat box and say hello there. Introduce yourself, what you teach, what part of the state you're in, your school system if you like, and if you want to add a picture, that's fine as well. So take a moment and do that, okay? And as we're doing that, I will continue. Okay, and so I want to take a couple of moments to talk about my work very briefly before we get into our webinar. And so I have 17 years of experience as both a classroom and online teacher, as a district administrator, and now as an education coach, author, and advocate. And in my current context, I'm a teacher online at Old Dominion University in Virginia, and I'm also the lead coach at Lifelong Learning Defined. I'm a published researcher in the Journal of Computer Science Integration, and I'm the author of Rev Up Robotics through ISTE. ISTE is the International Society for Technology Education. And so these are the ISTE standards for educators that we will be addressing in our session. And they are learner, citizen, facilitator, and designer. An equity leader is a computational thinking competency by ISTE, and we'll be addressing that as well. And whenever I'm talking about a tool or a practice, I will let you know which of these I'll be addressing. And so educators everywhere in the Commonwealth and throughout our country and the world have a lot of questions about what the new school year is going to look like. So I want you to real quick hop into the chat box and add any question or a keyword of a topic that you know folks have questions about, and hopefully we can answer a few of those in our session. Okay. I'm not seeing much action in the chat box, okay, but I know folks are watching. They're probably watching via YouTube, so I will continue. So what we're hearing is that schools or school is going to be a mix of both in-person and remote learning. And so, you know, states, and our state is implementing staggered calendars and schedules for many reasons due to COVID. And so that's for helping attendance, for protecting our staff and students, social distancing, of course, making classes smaller, and also improving academic outcomes for all our kids. And so that presents as a summer learning opportunity, which is why VISTE has had this playground. So I want to take a moment to say thank you to VISTE for having a virtual summit for us. I want to give y'all some snaps and some respect. Thank you so much. And so our presentation is going to focus on two aspects or two areas for making remote learning engaging for all kids. There's edtech or educational technology, and also instructional design topics for lesson planning. And so up first will be edtech. And so the first tool that I would like to introduce is Nearpod. And so the ISTE standards for educators that we will address are learner, facilitator, and designer. And I must say that before COVID-19 happened, I had never used Nearpod. I heard of Nearpod, I've seen Nearpod, but I wasn't acquainted with it. And so the reason why I started using Nearpod is because I had work that was scheduled in California, in Texas, in Connecticut, in Kansas. And so that work was either canceled, pushed back, or it went online. And so I needed a tool that would make my remote teaching engaging. And so I did some research and I found out that Nearpod is an awesome, awesome, awesome student engagement platform. And so I got some coaching. Over 3 weeks, I got about 3 hours of coaching, not at the same time now. And I worked on my lessons and I took several steps that I want to show you so that you can make your lessons also engaging. And so I don't want you to follow these steps right now, because if you do, you'll never do it in the time we have. I just want you to watch and see what we're doing, okay? And so, and you can always play this back, okay? So the first step is you go on the URL that's here and you make a free account. It's called the silver version, okay? And that's free for all educators. And so Nearpod allows you to do a lot of amazing things, but I want you to focus on these 3 items. And if you focus on these 3, you will make engaging lessons for all your kids. And so first are student lessons. And you'll have a couple of options here, and I'll explain those in a moment. Second is the add activity feature. And lastly is the lesson library. So let's unpack those real quick. So focus on the red circles, okay? And you can go back and you can follow all these steps later. But the first step is to make a lesson in Nearpod. And what I love, love, love about this feature is that I was able to take all my PowerPoint slides, dump them into Nearpod, and they became Nearpods. And so all I had to do after that was add activities. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So with your lessons, you'll have 2 options. So the live lesson is where you have all of your learners on at the same time. And the student paste is a code like I've given you, okay? And with that code, learners who can't log in, let's say they have Wi-Fi issues or they're waiting on a device, you know, from their parent who like a cell phone, right? They can log in after the live lesson has already gone on. Or let's say there's a kid that was in the live lesson, but they want to revisit the SOL topics and the products, they can go back and they can work at their own leisure. And so that's a very powerful scaffold, in the times that we're in right now. And so what I've done for you is I've created a self-paced lesson that you can go on after our session here or on the weekend, and you can explore on your own. And so all you have to do is go to join.nearpod.com and you can use this code, JPHCR, and you can take a picture of this if you want right now, okay? And you can go back later and you can check it out. But don't go now because I need you here. And so now let's add some content. And so into Nearpod, you can add content from all these different places. And I know educators are very, very familiar with this, so I won't get into that, but I'll show you the add activity feature. And so these are really, truly the awesome sauce, the secret weapon to making your lessons in such a way that your learners can interact with them. And so I can't model all of this now, but I will provide you some resources that will show you how to do that via video and other links. And so Nearpod has a lesson library, and the library has a plethora of different lessons that you can adapt for every content area and every grade level. And what's amazing is that Nearpod also has some featured lessons that are very, very relevant to what's happening in the world. And because we will be talking about social emotional learning, I want you guys to know that there's a ton of SEL lessons that can be adapted into any content area and at every grade level, okay? And so those are available, and I want you to be aware of that. And lastly, in Nearpod, they have a ton of free webinars, and you can access those on the URL at the bottom. Don't do it now, of course, but you can go back, and they have webinars where you can level up how you teach remotely, your lesson planning, and anything to do with Nearpod. And so the second ed tech tool is Zoom, and Zoom needs no introduction. And so the ISTE standards for educators that we're addressing here are learner, facilitator, and designer. And so Zoom does a lot of things, all right? But what I really want to focus on are the breakout rooms. And I'll tell you why. And this is directly from my website. And so I'm going to put my website, I'm going to put the URL into the chat box, okay, so that you all have it, okay? And so my teaching and my workshops really rely heavily on the use of evidence-based instructional strategies and vetted educational protocols. And so I needed a tool that can help me replicate my strategies virtually. And so these are a few of the strategies, and there's a lot here. And so what I did is I created an article that you can go to with hyperlinks for a lot of these strategies with tips on how to replicate them virtually. Okay. And as far as Zoom goes, I'm going to shift focus away from Zoom so that we can get into equity and SEL. But if we have time towards the end of the presentation, I'll come back to Zoom and show you how to set up breakout rooms. And I do want folks to know that as far as breakout rooms go, Zoom is not your only platform. There's Microsoft Teams, there's GoToMeeting, there's Ring Central. And so I would really advise you to check with your local district and your school to find out which platform is the right one for you. So now we're going to get into lesson design, and we're going to talk about equity, social emotional learning, and academics. And so the ISTE standards for educators that we are addressing here are learner, citizen, facilitator, designer, and equity leader. And so before we get into that though, I want to set the stage by focusing on policy. So there's a lot of hot topics in education reform, and ESSA is one of them. And so we had an international audience at ISTE last night, so we talked about this. And so I want to just, just as a reminder, the ESSA Act is the Every Student Succeeds Act. and it replaced No Child Left Behind. And it was signed into effect by our former president, Mr. Barack Obama, in 2015. And so just for a moment, I want you to look at ESSA at a glance and just to see what the act is all about. And this is the purpose of ESSA. And you're going to notice a big focus on the achievement of disadvantaged students, like students in poverty, minorities, exceptional education students, and English language learners. And these are the accountability and requirements of ESSA. And there's a reason why I'm showing you this. I think that educators, when they're planning instruction, really need to focus on policy. I think that's a part of it, not just the standards. And also school leaders, as they're aligning initiatives in their districts and their schools, they also need to think about policy. And so based on what we just saw and read about ESSA, it's safe to say that we can leverage ESSA for educational equity. And so I don't see many folks in the chat. So I was going to ask a few questions, but I'll just proceed. And so according to the Center for Public Education, educational equity is—
Excuse me, George. Everybody is in the chat in YouTube. There's nobody in the chat.
Okay. So
I'm watching that to see if we have any questions. Do you want to take questions now or?
No. Okay. Okay. So there's— okay, great. So, all right. So I'll keep going. Okay.
Okay.
According to the Center for Public Education, educational equity is only achieved when all students receive everything they need in order to succeed. And so typically when we talk about equity, this is the picture that we show our educators. And so I do realize that this picture does get some pushback, but for our purposes, I want us to think of the fence. I want us to focus on the fence. And I want us to think of the fence as a systemic barrier. And so many people say, get rid of the fence. And although that's not always as easy to do as we see here, let's say for a moment that we did remove the fence. Let's say it was gone. Well, those who are supposedly liberated are just spectators. They're not participants in the game. And so to understand equity is to understand the fence. So let's get current in regards to inequities. The coronavirus spotlighted inequities, not just in Virginia, not just in the United States, but all over the world, and impacted every aspect of family life, like childcare, healthcare, employment, transportation, and access to food. Now, I want everyone to look at the second bullet. According to the World Food Program, in 2019, an estimated 310 million children, that is not an accident, 310 million children from low-income families were being fed at school. And so I want us to pause for a moment, and I want us to think about our students from low-income families. And I want us to think about what they went through and the traumas that they experienced. And not just them, but their families as a result of this. I want us to also imagine that they were our children, our grandchildren, our siblings. And now I want you to look at the final 3 bullets, because here you'll see the inequities due to lack of tech and digital platforms. So take a moment and view those. Okay, in the interest of time, I'll fast forward, but we can come back to this. And so in 2020, the inequities didn't stop there. The murder of George Floyd caused outrage and trauma to the collective in the United States and also the world. And for those who teach African American children, we need to really understand and realize the message that this sends to them and to their families. And we also need to understand that this is not something new. These are just representations of recent victims. Please take a moment to view all of their faces. The horrors that we witness have been systemically put in place for over 400 years in the United States. Think of the trauma that has been caused by racism, systemic racism, murder, and all forms of oppression. Just think about that for a moment and how that affects our students of color, and particularly our African American students. And so this systemic barrier or fence, it needs to be removed, but it also needs to be understood. Because if we don't understand it, then we'll never get to equity. And if we don't get to equity, we'll never get to social emotional learning. So let's try to understand.
This is Jamal. Jamal is a boy who lives in a poor neighborhood. He has a friend named Kevin who lives in a wealthy neighborhood. All of Jamal's neighbors are African American, and all of Kevin's neighbors are white. Because Jamal's school district is mostly funded by property taxes, his school is not very well funded. His classrooms are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access to high-quality tutors or extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by property taxes, so his school is very well funded. His classrooms are never crowded, his teachers are very well paid, and he has access to high-quality tutors and lots of extracurricular activities. Kevin and Jamal live only a few streets away from each other. So how come they're growing up in such different worlds with such different opportunities for success? The answer has to do with America's history of systemic racism. To understand it better, let's look at what life was like for Kevin and Jamal's grandparents. Decades after the Civil War, many government agencies started to draw maps dividing cities into sections that were either desirable or undesirable for investment. This practice was called redlining, and it usually blocked off entire Black neighborhoods from access to private and public investment. Banks and insurance companies used these maps for decades to deny Black people loans and other services based purely on race. Historically speaking, owning a home and getting a college education is the easiest way for an American family to build wealth. But when Jamal's grandparents wanted to buy a house, the banks refused because they lived in a neighborhood that was redlined. So Jamal's grandparents were not able to buy a home, and because colleges could prevent them from attending through legal segregation, their options for higher education were really scarce. Kevin's grandparents, on the other hand, got a low-interest loan to buy their first house and got accepted into a handful of top universities, which traditionally only accepted white students. This opened up a wealth of opportunities that they were able to pass on to their kids and grandkids. Even as late as the 1980s, an investigation into the Atlanta real estate market showed that banks were more willing to lend to low-income white families than to middle or upper-income African-American families. As a result, today, for every $100 of wealth held by a white family, Black families have $5.04. A 2017 study confirms that redlining is still affecting home values in major cities like Chicago today. This explains how Kevin and Jamal inherited vastly different circumstances. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. A big part of systemic racism is implicit bias. These are prejudices in society that people are not aware that they have. Let's go back to Kevin and Jamal. Against all odds, Jamal manages to be the only student from his high school to get accepted into a great university, the same one that Kevin and his high school friends are attending. But after Kevin and Jamal both graduate, Jamal notices that his resume isn't drawing as much interest as Kevin's, even though they graduated from the same program with the exact same GPA. Unfortunately for Jamal, studies show that resumes with white-sounding names get twice as many callbacks as identical resumes with Black-sounding names. Implicit bias is one of the reasons why the Black unemployment rate is twice the rate of white unemployment, even among college graduates today. You can see evidence of systemic racism in every area of life. The disparities in family wealth, incarceration rates, political representation, and education are all examples of systemic racism. Unfortunately, the biggest challenge with systemic racism is that there's no single person or entity responsible for it. which makes it very hard to solve. So what can you do? The first thing you can do is work towards becoming more aware of your own implicit biases. What are some prejudices that you might hold that you're not aware of? Second, let's acknowledge that the consequences of slavery and Jim Crow laws are still affecting access to opportunity today. As a result, we should support systemic changes that create more equal opportunities for everyone. Increasing public school funding and making it independent from property taxes would be a great start so that poor and wealthy districts can receive equal access to resources. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. Luckily, we're all part of the system, which means that we all have a role to play in making it better.
All right, so I don't want you to go into Nearpod, but just in the chat box in YouTube, if you can answer one of these questions. It's just a reflection question, and I'll give you guys a minute for that, and I'm going to see what you guys were typing. And I'm sorry, before I thought we were in Zoom. I didn't realize that we were on YouTube, but I got myself straight. So let me see what you guys are answering there. Don't worry about Nearpod for now. Okay, so while you guys are typing those, I will continue. And so the reason why equity was highlighted is because we want to get to social emotional learning. And so the thing about SEL is that SEL works for helping us to teach our kids how to understand their environment, themselves, and other people, so that they can manage themselves, have good relationships, and make really good decisions. However, we need to understand the type of help our kids need before we can coach them on these things, you see? And so we need to really understand that. And so I want us to look for a moment at the benefits of social emotional learning in schools. So look at this slide for a moment, and I'm monitoring what's happening in YouTube. This is an eye-opening video. Yes, it's, there's a lot of things I didn't know as well. And so I'm learning as we go along. So I've been learning tools like, Nearpod and things like that, but I'm also, learning about SEL and, just what's happening. And so I love to share personal stories at times, especially about social emotional learning, because I believe that for educators, we need to understand that SEL is not just for our kids, but it's also for us as well. And so my story with SEL really began with my two children about 2 years ago. Well, when they started to become, older teens, I realized that the way they were responding and interacting with me started changing. I started getting a lot of eye rolls. They were looking the other way when I was talking. Sometimes they would back talk and things like that. And so I knew as a teacher, as an educator, that I would have to learn some new skills, change my approach if I was going to have a good relationship with them as they got older. And so one day I was reading an article on making first impressions by Dr. Travis Bradberry. And in the article, he talks about his book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, that he co-wrote with Gene Greaves. And so in the book, he had an EQ, or emotional intelligence appraisal. Well, I took the appraisal online, and let's just say I had some work to do. And so that's my personal story with SEL. But before we get into what that can look like online, let me show you what it looks like in schools in about 60 seconds.
Social emotional skills are the essential skills for success in school, work, and life. Social emotional learning centers their mind and body. It reduces their emotional tension so they can be open to new content and material. We find that academic outcomes increase exponentially when students are nurtured, loved, and cared for, that we get much more out of them when we first address social emotional needs. So for us, it's actually an academic intervention and not just an emotional one. If we expect students to be college and career ready, it's important for us to focus on these skills and competencies: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making.
The Collaborative for Academic, Social and Emotional Learning, or CASEL, really defined SEL over 2 decades ago and have stated that the purpose of SEL is to help young people really develop these 5 core competencies. And they are self-awareness for self-management, social awareness for relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And so each of the core competencies have their own set of skills. Please take a moment to view this. And don't worry, we can't, learn this all in one shot or even, capture this all, but we can always play back this video. So I'm going to proceed in the interest of time. And so now we'll get into self-awareness for self-management. And these are the skills that are associated with self-awareness. And so in the PDF that I sent you, there is a video of what that looks like in the classroom. But for the interest of time, I won't play it here, okay? But it's on the PDF that I put into the chat box in YouTube. And actually, I'm gonna drop it again, okay? It's an Edutopia video. But don't watch it right now, okay? And so when it comes to self-awareness, the first step is helping kids label their emotions. And the purpose of helping them label their emotions is so that we can provide them strategies that can help put them back into a peaceful state. And really, we always want not just them to be at peace, but for us to be at peace, because we always do our best work when we're at peace. And so for this purpose, I really love Plutchik's Wheel of Emotions, because it simplifies emotions for learners of all ages and helps them focus on 8 basic ones: anger, anticipation, joy, trust, fear, surprise, sadness, and disgust. And so this really allows students to see how the emotions they experience are the amalgamation of the 8 main ones and also some other ones. And really, that's a powerful, powerful realization for them. So take a moment and view the wheel. Now, once my kids are familiar with emotions, I introduce an emotions check-in via an emotion planner, like you see here. Now, obviously, this one is filled out with examples from each of the 4 content areas. But I would do this in a classroom on my whiteboard, or I would do it virtually in Nearpod. And you don't only have to use Nearpod. You can use any LMS, Google Docs, whatever backbone that you use for blended learning, you can do this. So let me explain this real quick. And so for the sake of modeling, I have filled this all out, okay? So let me explain. In the first column, you're going to have a row for each of the content areas. And I've identified either a concept or a product that the kids have to master. Now, if you look into the middle column, I placed an emotion from the wheel. Now, that's one that I think that they may experience. Now, in the final column are strategies for SEL. Now, the thing that we have to bear in mind is this, that if they don't know how to manage that emotion and it's a new strategy that they're learning, then we might have to model it, or we will have to model it. And once they learn how to use the strategy, then they can use it on their own to self-manage. And so the planner is very versatile and can be adapted to any issue that's either a current event or an issue that's dealing with remote learning. And so just look at that for a moment. And I'm looking in the chat box. And so this is where the emotion planner or the check-in can live in the context of a weekly lesson plan. So let's look at the first column. There, I have my product that my kids are working on for the entire week. And so I'm a computer science teacher, so they're working on a computational artifact. Now, if you look at the second column, that's where I have my learning targets, my I can statements. So the I can statements are like the SLO, students will be able to, okay? And so you can have, either of those there. And so the final product and the learning targets are what the kids have to master. Well, if you look into the third column, the emotions check-in can be a formative assessment to see what they're experiencing in regards to the work that they have to do. And then if you look into the fourth column, that is where the strategy can be implemented as a learning activity or as a scaffold. And so the SEL strategies that you see in that column, they come from the strategies we've identified in the check-in. And that's how it can be done. So let me show you what that looks like virtually. So virtually, all I would do, and even, like in person, I would introduce what I want them to be thinking about. In this case, it's a quiz. So they would label their emotion, and then they can identify their own strategy, or we can do it together. And so the really cool thing about that is that we can do that in a small group or in small groups, and we can do it virtually. And I do want to say, I'm using Nearpod, I'm using Zoom, but you can use whatever platform your school system allows you to use, okay? So let's recap, okay? When using the emotions planner, the first step is introduce the check-in. Second step, label the emotion. The third step is to implement a strategy for coming back at peace. And so there's an article that I created, and I'm going to drop that into the chat box because it describes these and also has some information on restorative practices for restorative justice. And Christine says she loves this. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. All right, so let's push forward. And so there's a reflection question. You know what? Answer one of those if you'd like and drop it into the chat box in YouTube. I'll give you guys a few seconds to see if people are responding. And if not, we can move forward. But I love reflection questions because, John Dewey said, we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. And so that's an important thing to do is to reflect. Okay, so William says, I'm still thinking about the cartoon earlier about the difference between equality and equity. Yeah. Why do go one-to-one and get every kid a Chromebook when we should survey families to spend more money on kids who have no internet and tech? That's a great point, William. That's a great point. So for the interest of time, we will push forward. So now let's tackle social awareness and relationship skills. And so these are some of the skills that are associated with social awareness. We're looking pretty good on time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show a quick video of what that can look like in schools.
The social awareness is about embracing diversity, showing empathy for others. Activities might include service learning projects, addressing social justice issues. Role playing is a great opportunity for students to address how a person might have felt in a conflict on the playground.
We're going to see if other people have had some of the very same experiences around bullying that we've had.
You're in my boat if you have a bully now.
Wow, I see a lot of people.
Relationship skills are important in project-based learning. It's the ability to work cooperatively with someone to resolve conflict.
It's the one skill you need your whole life. You may not need calculus tomorrow, but you have to know how to work in a relationship, whether it's for a coworker or a life partner. You have to know how to handle conflict and how to handle challenges.
Sometimes at recess, Maya would come over and just start talking about us and saying mean things.
Is it your job to make Danae's job at school hard?
I know it's a form of bullying, and sometimes I'll say sorry to her.
So you choose to be someone's ally and make a better choice.
So when it comes to social awareness, again, it's all about labeling emotions. And so here's an emotions planner, having students label their emotions about two very different but very difficult social interactions. So one is an argument, and the other is going into a new school setting. And I filled these out, again, for the sake of modeling. So I identified emotions from the wheel that, I know any normal person, not just young people, would experience, and then some strategies for helping them get back into a peaceful state. And again, that can be done, virtually via a check-in. It can be done in a small group. And again, you can use any platform that your school division has made for you. These are the ones I use. And I also recommend looking into learning circles. Learning circles are very powerful for, helping kids with social interactions and relationship skills. And so that can be done in person, but there's also virtual circles. And I'm working on an article right now where I'm going to take folks through the 3 steps of that. It's very powerful, and please look into that. And when we're talking about social awareness work, there's one thing that we really have to think about. And so I want to come back to structures, right? SEL is for helping kids with their social interactions, right? But the thing is this, we have to be socially and culturally competent about what structures and inequities are hurting or plaguing them. We have to know them, because if we don't know them, then they won't want to work with us. And that's a very important point. So on the Wordle, here are some inequities or structures that are plaguing our kids, and we can come back and look at that. Because if we don't, we're not going to have the right language, right? And the right background on these topics. And so what that means is we can do more harm than actual good. You see, really focusing on equity is not just about removing a fence. It requires us to understand the systemic conditions that have led to the disadvantages and the associated traumas, especially for the most disadvantaged students. When we're talking about racial equity, right, we have to understand the effects of the structures of systemic racism and the trauma that it causes. And so for that, there's some research-based pedagogies that are really important that we use our summer months to really dive into. There's trauma-informed teaching, culturally responsive teaching, and restorative justice. And so for these pedagogies, I've curated some very helpful resources. So take a moment and look at those topics. And I'm going to add an article that I created for ISTE with hyperlinks to each of those. And that's the article right there. And it's now in the chat box in YouTube, and you can bookmark it. And now for the last part of SEL is good decision making. Before we get into what that can look like virtually or through pedagogy, let's look at a video of what that can look like in schools. Whoops, went a little too fast.
Responsible decision-making is considering the well-being for self and others. It's evaluating the consequences for various behaviors or actions. We do this through shared agreements, one-to-one problem solving, or having students debate an issue.
If you were like, hey, Kashida, how much does an egg cost in this class? And you like took out your wallet, and I was like, $50 will work. Which one of us would be corrupt in that case?
You're the one that's asking for the money.
We're truly teaching these students to be productive citizens. We're teaching them life skills. We're teaching them how to problem solve effectively. We're teaching them how to be resilient.
I think of all the billions of dollars we've spent on Title I and all these intervention programs. And when all is said and done, what do we have to show for it? I think we're trying to teach technical things instead of devoting some of the resources to teach who you are as a person. Once you know who you are, then learning becomes exciting because you've already established a discipline.
And so for a moment, let's focus on the skills that are needed for good, responsible decision making. And so as we read through them, like, identifying problems, analyzing situations, solving problems, reflection, ethical responsibility. Well, for a STEM teacher or a science teacher, we know that we can teach a lot of these skills through our pedagogy, right? Through scientific inquiry, engineering design, but also we can teach it through project-based learning. And so project-based learning is a powerful approach when done right, especially when projects focus on topics that deal with social justice for helping very disadvantaged groups. And so for a moment, I want to focus on a framework and a model of excellence that are built on research for PBL and can help our kids not just with really good decision-making, but with SEL in tandem with academics and career skills. And so all of the leaders in project-based learning from all over the world have created the high-quality PBL framework. And the framework is do it yourself. And they've identified 6 very important components that when implemented in a project, then the project is high quality. So look at those for a moment. And so in the context of good decision-making, if we frame intellectual challenge, project management, and reflection in the context of the responsible decision-making skills that we see in the bullets, then we can help our kids achieve these skills over time. It's not going to happen in one project. It happens over time because repetition is the mother of skill. And so the framework can be downloaded for free at hqpbl.org. Now don't go there now, okay? You can watch this again and you can download it. It's available in English and Spanish. And so now I want to focus on a model of excellence for PBL. And it's by PBL Works, formerly known as Buck Institute for Education. And so the model is built on 2 frameworks. So the first framework is the orange one. These are the 7 essential project design elements. And the turquoise framework are the project-based teaching practices. I like to call this the what, the elements that need to go into a good project or unit, and the how that unit or project, same thing, is taught. And so I'm very proud to say that I'm part of the national faculty for PBL Works. And I want to give a shout out to our faculty and to our staff, past and present. And I want you guys to know that this does require training though. It's not a 1, 2, 3 thing. And so for those folks that are ISTE members, right now ISTE is having a summer learning academy. It's going on for 3 weeks. I was a featured speaker last night, and next week, my good friends Rich and Lisa are doing a session on facilitating educational equity online through PBL. I really, really, really encourage you to check this out. So let me see my time. Tim, how am I on time? Do I have 10 minutes to speak, or are we doing?
We try to end by 5 of, so you have about 7 minutes if you can squeeze everything in.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to Zoom. And so again, I want to focus on the breakout rooms. Now, I chose to do Zoom last, and the reason why is this. People really want to hear about equity and SEL. And so to honor that, I've rearranged my slides. If I'm doing a workshop, that's over an hour, obviously I would do this first, but I want to show you the things that I focus on with my clients. I coach a lot of teachers every day, and these are the type of things that they say that they need and that I put together. So let me show you how to do that in Zoom. And so the very first step would be to make an account, and a basic account is free on that URL. Now don't do that right now, just play this back and do it. And so you have to go into the settings to enable the breakout rooms. And this is what it looks like. So let's zoom into that real quick. And so I'm going to take my cursor and go to the red circles. First thing you have to do is enable breakout room here. And then you have to check here where it says allow host. And when you do that, you're going to see the icon with the red arrow appear in Zoom. Those are your breakout rooms. And when you do that, then you can make the rooms. And so if you look at the left here, you can either do that automatically or manually, and you could put your learners into as many rooms as you want. And on the right, they're going to get a message like that where they can join. And so the really cool thing about this in Zoom is that you can move your kids in and out of rooms anytime you want. And you can also visit any room to engage and coach at will. And what I love about this is because it's basically having virtual learning centers or stations. And so for elementary school teachers who have small kids, I really recommend, if you're going to be using any type of breakout room, I would have a guardian or a parent on with the kid. One thing that I will say about Nearpod, and I know it's possible in, in other forms of blended learning, is that the kids can draw. And so that's an important feature for young kids that still aren't reading and writing. And educators love this part. They can shut down all of the breakout rooms at the same time and bring everyone back into the main classroom. And so I wrote a couple of articles that really describe all of this in detail. This one is from Edutopia, and it came out last week. I'm dropping that into the chat box. And the second one, it's for English language learners with strategies that are specific for kids who are learning English. Okay, I just dropped those into the chat box in YouTube. And so you can bookmark those. And there's a lot of hyperlinks in there. And the way that I teach is the way I write, everything in actionable steps. The research is also available in the articles as well.
George?
Sure.
I'm sorry, we don't see any of those links in there, but what I think we can do is if you can send me all the links.
Yeah, wait. So I have a question, Tim. I'm
Sure.
dropping a bunch of stuff into YouTube, into the chat box. You guys aren't seeing those?
I'm not. I don't know that anybody else is either.
Oh my gosh. So I've been sending it the whole time.
That's all right. Like I said,
Okay.
what we can do is you can send me all these links and I will put them in the notes field for the recording.
Okay.
So when they go back to the recording, they'll be able to get the links as well.
All right. So my apology, everyone. I've been doing that, but I'm going
That's
to.
all right. We're all trying to learn this whole system anyway.
I will provide one PDF with everything on it. Okay. And it's going to have a description of this workshop in case you want to ask your boss to have me host one day or have me visit either virtually, and you'll see all of that. I'm sorry
Excellent.
about that.
If you send that to me, I'll make sure it gets into the notes for the recording for this. So if you go back to the recording in the Vista channel on YouTube, you'll find those links as well.
Okay, I promise that that will be sent immediately after we're done here. And I'm going to provide you my email, or access to me so that way you can reach out if you want. So thank you so much.
I think, at least for me, this was an awful lot of information, good information all at one time. So I'm going to have to go back and rewatch the video myself and explore some of those resources as well.
Yeah, so take a picture right there, y'all. That URL is to my website, and you can get my email there. I do virtual workshops. And when we come back, when we do, I also do this as well. And so that's my handle on Twitter and Instagram. And you can send me a private message there as well at George Does PBL. That is JORGE. And my book right now via ISTE is 30% off with the code Academy. So for folks who are interested in STEM, computer science, and computational thinking in the context of robotics, that's available. And I know I gave you a lot of information, but this is the information that is relevant right now in schools, right? And so it's a tandem of ed tech and instructional design topics. And so I wanted to give you it all, but I wanted it all to connect. So if you have any questions, I'm here to answer as much as I can.
And I think that everybody agrees that this is going to be a very challenging school year all the way around between COVID and all the social justice issues and who knows whatever else is going to come up. I'm expecting an invasion or something around, alien invasion around October or so. Are there any final questions before we leave this?
Can I give a couple of shout outs? So I want to give
By
a
all
shout
means.
out. Yeah, so Richmond City Public Schools, we are RPS. I used to be an employee. If anyone out there is from RPS, I want you to know that in all my travels, I don't forget you. Prince George County, Spotsylvania County, Spotsy teachers are the best, okay? Who else do I work with? I'll be doing some work with the VDOE this summer, and we're going to do some robotics and some coding workshops. Look out for those. But I also do workshops for SEL equity and for lesson planning, and I have full understanding of all the content areas, all the SOLs. So if you need me, you can holler at me at that URL right there.
And I took a quick look at some of the stuff on there. There's an awful lot of good material on there. So by all means, go visit and come back and listen to this video again. I'm going to end the stream right here and thank everybody who's been watching, and especially thank everybody who's, except I've lost my cursor here. Let's see if we can make it. Okay. And especially thank everybody who's been participating all the last couple of days in all the sessions. We really appreciate your time, and we really appreciate all the great ideas that you've been trading with other people. So everybody have a wonderful evening, and I hope everybody has a really good start to the school year.
Mr. Owens, I just want to say
we are out.